Hi, Steve Gale here. Today what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at using Node-RED to access a MySQL database. And the MySQL database is running in a Ubuntu VM. So first of all, what we'll do is we'll log into Ubuntu. And I've previously installed Node and Node-RED into this Ubuntu VM. Just waiting to log in. And in the installation process, basically, first of all, you need to install Node.js, download Node, and you can install that via the package management. And then once Node is installed, then you can use the Node package manager to install Node-RED. So what I'll do is I'll start up a terminal session. And in this terminal session, I'm just going to type Node-RED, and that'll start up the Node-RED server. You see it's firing up here. And it'll tell me the IP address and port number that Node is running in. So 127.0.0.1, and the port number is 1880. So I've got a flow which I've already set up, so I'll just open up Firefox and we can have a look at that flow. A flow is a series of Node-RED might be easiest if I just restore the session. This VM's not connected to the internet at the moment, but for using Node-RED and MySQL it doesn't need to be, so that's fine. Okay, so you can see here that this is the UI. So 127.0.0.1 port number 1880/UI brings up the user interface console. But first of all, I'll go into Node-RED. I'm going to have a look at the flow. This is the flow that I've set up. I'm just going to describe a little bit about this flow. So first of all, we need an input and to inject. So what I'm doing is I'm injecting. I've got an inject node here, and that's set up as a timestamp. So if we just double click on the timestamp node, you can see here that what the timestamp node, the inject node is setting up as a timestamp is going to, it's got an inject interval of every 3 seconds. So what that means is that every 3 seconds that's going to create a trigger, and that trigger then can be used to connect to the database. So that's the inject node configuration. The next thing I need to do is I need to set up a query. And this is my database query here. So let's have a look at this one. So this function node is set up as a, I've called it select temp query, that's its name. So it's going to query the temperature from the database. So here I've got my, my database select statement, select temperature from the table, which is called CIPI data. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring back the most recent entry, temperature entry in the table. So what I've got here in the SQL code is I've got order by ID and descending. So the ID is the key field. So that'll bring me back the last ID field. And I'm going to limit the number of records that come back to 1. So what that does is that'll return one temperature value, and it'll return the most recent temperature value from the database. And then this just then returns message. So the message, the message topic has the actual select query for the database. So I won't change that. The next section of the flow here. I failed to mention that what I had to do to get this section in here was I had to add in I had to add in the MySQL database support. Now the way you do that is you go into Manage Palette, and then I go into Install, and then I had to search for MySQL, but these are the ones that have been installed. So I'll have a look at the ones that I've installed. So what I installed was Red MySQL. So I installed that one. The other one I installed was the dashboard support, Red dashboard. So I installed these two. So by going into install and then search for dashboard, search for SQL and select the correct one. And these, using the palette, I've installed both of those into Node-RED. Go away. Okay, so what this gives me in addition is it gives me additional elements that I can work with over here. So it brings in the storage section, it brings in the MySQL one, and the dashboard gives me the ability to display the output of in the dashboard. I get all of these things. I get buttons, drop downs, switches, sliders, text input, date picker. The one that I'm using is the gauge, and you can see down here using the gauge, and I'm also using text output as well. So I'm using gauge and text. These are the two that I'm using for the dashboard. Anyway, so you need to install those obviously, so you can use them. The next one, the MySQL one I've got, is this one here, which is CCP IOTDB is what I've named it, and this is the one that connects to the MySQL database. So let's have a look. So this is the database. So let's have a look at the configuration. So it's on localhost because it's on this instance of Ubuntu. Standard port number 3306. This is the username. That's the user's password. This is the database, and it asks for the time zone, and I guess I just put in GMT plus 10 because even though I'm in Malaysia at the moment, GMT plus 10 is the time zone that I'm normally in. So that was the configuration for the MySQL database node. And I don't think there's anything special in the node settings. No. Okay, so the next thing I used was this one here, message payload. Now what this does is this just displays the output from the database. This is an output node. Where are we? Where's our output nodes? It's a debug output node, and it's going to show me the message payload. So it's going to show me what comes back from the SQL query, and it's going to show me over in the information section, which is the debug, which is one of these debug messages. Yeah, so these are the debug messages. There's a few from before, but basically what I'll do is I'll trash those, clear the log, so we've got a clean slate. So the next thing I do is, well, here's some here. This is obviously running, it's injecting. So let's have a look here. You can see here, this is the object that comes back, and it's an array. This is from the SQL query, so it's an array of one object, and element 0 contains, it's essentially like JSON data. It's like temperature, and the value is in quotes here, 31.25. So this is the sort of data that's coming back from the database query as being displayed by the debug node in the debug output. So what I need to do is I need to process this into the gauge and also the temp text so I can see what's going on in the dashboard. So I want to display this data in the dashboard. So with the gauge, I had to do a bit of mucking around because what's coming back is in array format, but the gauge is expecting a value. So basically what I needed to do was I needed to extract that value out of the array, this 31.25 degrees value, out of this array for the gauge. So let's have a look at how we configured the gauge. Okay, well it needed to be added to a group, so I needed to create a new group. And I called the group temperature home. So that was a group, because when you're using these dashboard widgets, they need to live in a group. So type is gauge, label is gauge. The value format. Now this is where I had to dig into the message payload, which is an array of, and it's element 0. So I've got message.payload element 0, and what I want is I want the temperature. So what I could do if I wanted to is I could add another gauge for the humidity. If I said select temperature and humidity from CPI data, order by ID descending limit 1. So if this was my SQL query, if I was not just getting the temperature, but I was also getting humidity as well, then I could set up another gauge, and I could go message.payload 0 humidity, and that would give me a measure of the humidity value. Probably not a bad idea. We should probably do that. We might actually do that by using another gauge. And then down bit more setup in the gauge. So I've got units. Now, in the case of the units, what I'm doing, I'm setting up a color gradient. So the temperature is not going to, hopefully not going to get above 50 degrees, because that's pretty hot. So what I've done is I've set the sectors for the color gradient for the gauge. So 0 to 23 is green. 0 to 23 actually probably should be, it's a bit cold, but I've made that green because it's cold. 23 to 30, that's getting up there, so that's the yellow, and between 30 and 50 is going to give me a red display. So I've got no name there, so that's for the gauge setup. Now also for not necessary, but I've got a temp text as well. Now, I've got a go back to our widgets. Where's our widgets? Dashboard widgets. A text display. So I've got the text display here. Let's have a look at the configuration of the text display. So with the text display, it's added to the same group, the temperature group, and I'm just displaying the message payload. But I could just say payload 0 dot temperature, just like I did in the other one. But I'm just displaying the raw string, the message payload string, so I can see what's going on. And I don't think there's any other special configuration in this one. Probably the only thing to notice here is that this has also been added to the same group, the temperature group. So if I go in here and I can look at, this is the group node, the temperature, and obviously you can muck around with this, how the layout, the grid layout, the type of layout that you're using, the width, and all that sort of stuff in the grid format on the dashboard. But I'm not too fussed about the look of it, so just I've added those two to the same. Both of them have been added to the same group on the dashboard. Okay, so basically what's happening is that I can get this thing running, and I think it is running, because we can see here that if I quit out of this, you can see it's running. But to set it to run, basically what you do is you click on here, and then once you've clicked on there, it'll then continue to run. Every 3 seconds it's doing another query, and that query is updating the dashboard. So the way I get to the dashboard is I'll just pinch this URL here. That's my Node-RED server. I've got one here, but I'll just go to a new one. So just a new window. So I just type that in, and slash, and then followed by UI, user interface, and that'll bring up the Node-RED dashboard. Hopefully. Here it comes. Okay, so you can see we've got our gauge, and our gauge is displaying 31.25, which is in the red zone. You can see here. So there's our units. I should change the units to degrees C. That might be a better look. Yeah, let's go back and do that. So let's go back to our flow. Hope I don't wreck anything. Go back to our gauge. Go back to our units, and we'll put here, oops, degrees C, and done. And And I'm not sure whether I have to re-trigger it to start or whether it'll just automatically update. Let's go and have a look and find out. Do a refresh. No, it's still displaying units. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll go back to my flow. Ah, that's what I should have showed you. Yeah, once you make a change to this, what you've got to do is you've got to deploy it. So I click deploy, and it's been successfully deployed. So once it's been deployed, I've got to re-trigger it to start again. So I'll just do that. And then the new one's been deployed. So now if I go back to the UI, what we should see, we can see here, yeah, we've got degrees C in here. So 31.25 degrees C is the most recent value in our database. And this is the raw text. This is the raw text field coming back. So I'm just displaying the actual raw data, which is from the message payload from the database, and you can see that this has been interpreted into JSON format string. Alright, so the only other thing to do to round this off is just to give you a bit of insight. Probably should have started with this, but let's go and have a look at the database structure. Just log into my database. So here's my database here. It's a table. Let's have a look at the table structure. So I've got the ID key field, which is that's set for auto increment, and that's where, you know, with that SQL query, I could go and look at the basically get the last value. So that's there. I've got a device name, which is the name of the device that's doing the logging. I've got humidity, I've got temperature, and I've got a read date timestamp. So humidity and temperature are varchar 8s, but they're the values there. So let's go and see if we can add another gauge. Hopefully I don't. Oops, come back. I'll grab another gauge. Put it down here. Might go to this gauge. Let's have a quick look. I'll just copy that. And so this is going to be humidity. I have to change the SQL query, aren't I? Make this humidity. What's the units of humidity? I don't know. I might just leave it as units. 100%. It's maximum humidity, yeah? It's rain. So what's good? 0 to 30. 70 to 100. This is humidity. Need to add it to the same group. Temperature, add it to the temperature group. Okay. Label. Humidity gauge. Done that. So I'll wire it up from the same. This is from the output. Oh, yep. Pop that on there. Better go back to my SQL query. That's not my query. That's my database connection. Okay. Better change the name of it. SIP temperature and humidity from SIPI data order by ID descending limit. Now it'll be interesting to see. It should still come back with one record. Let's have a look. So done that, and let's deploy. Okay, so let's delete that. Yeah, so we get temperature and humidity. So it all seems to be kicking along okay. So with a bit of luck, if we go to our dashboard, we've got a temperature gauge, 36.54, that was our last measurement in the database. Okay, so that seems to be working quite well. All right, well, look, thank you very much for listening, and that's it for me.